The wind came down from the mountains like it had a score to settle, slicing through the open plains and rattling the loose boards of the old feed store at the edge of Willow Creek. It was the kind of cold that found its way into bones and memories, the kind that made even grown men feel small. Caleb Warren felt it bite through his flannel as he stepped down from his truck, pulling his hat lower over his ears. He had lived on this land for 48 years, long enough to know that winter didn't ask permission. It simply arrived and took what it wanted. That night, as he slammed the truck door shut, he had no idea winter was about to take something from him too, something he didn't even know he still had. Caleb was known around town as the quiet rancher. Not unfriendly, just careful with words, as if each one cost him something. He owned 3,000 acres of scrubland and pasture, a modest herd of cattle, and a farmhouse that echoed too much for a single man. Folks said he'd been different since his wife, Anna, passed away 10 winters ago. Since then, he worked, ate, slept, and prayed in a steady, unchanging rhythm. Kind, yes. Generous when asked, but distant, like a man standing behind glass, watching life move on without him. That night, he'd only come to town for salt blocks and diesel. He planned to be back home before the worst of the storm hit. Snow was already drifting across the road in pale waves when he heard it, thin, broken, and desperate. A child's cry. Then another. He paused mid-step, one hand still on the truck bed, breath fogging in the air. In Willow Creek, people locked their doors early when storms rolled in. No one lingered outside with children in weather like this. The sound came again, closer this time, carried by the wind from behind the feed store. Caleb hesitated. He'd learned long ago not to go looking for trouble. But the cry wasn't trouble. It was fear. And fear had a way of slipping past even the strongest defenses. He rounded the corner, boots crunching on ice, and there he saw them. A woman stood huddled against the brick wall, her arms wrapped around 2 small children. A boy and a girl, no older than 6 and 4. Their cheeks were red raw from the cold, tears freezing at the corners of their eyes. The woman's coat was thin, more autumn than winter, and her hands shook as she tried to rub warmth into her children's arms. She looked up when she saw him, eyes wide, not pleading, just tired. Caleb didn't speak right away. He took in the scene like a man surveying a pasture after a storm, noting damage before deciding what to do. The children's shoes were worn through at the toes. The woman's lips were blue. The boy coughed, a dry, rattling sound that didn't belong in such a small chest. "I'm not asking for money," the woman said quickly, her voice hoarse. "We were just resting. We'll be gone soon." Caleb swallowed. He'd heard that tone before. Pride wrapped around desperation like barbed wire. He glanced up at the sky, heavy with snow, then back at the children whose crying had quieted into soft whimpers. He shrugged out of his heavy canvas coat without thinking, the one Anna had bought him years ago because it was too warm to be practical. He knelt in front of the children and wrapped it around both of them, pulling them close. "Not tonight," he said softly, more to the cold than to them. "You're not leaving tonight." The woman stared at him, stunned. "Sir, I can't." "You can," he said gently. "And you will." He led them to his truck, helping the children climb into the cab. He turned the heater on full blast, the vents groaning as warm air filled the space. The girl leaned into her brother, eyes fluttering shut almost instantly. The boy watched Caleb with cautious trust, clutching the coat like it might disappear if he loosened his grip. "What's your name?" Caleb asked the woman as she climbed in. "Maria," she said quietly. "These are Lucas and Ellie. I'm Caleb." They drove in silence at first, the storm thickening around them. Snow erased the road in places, forcing Caleb to slow. Maria kept glancing at him, as if trying to figure out what kind of man picked up strangers in a blizzard. Finally, she spoke. "We were supposed to be on a bus to Billings," she said. "It broke down 2 towns back. The shelter here was full. I didn't know where else to go." Caleb nodded, eyes on the road. He knew that shelter. Knew how fast beds filled when winter came early. "You got family?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not anymore." The words landed heavier than the snow. Caleb felt something shift inside his chest, an old ache stirring. When they reached his ranch, the house glowed faintly in the dark, a single porch light cutting through the storm. Caleb helped Maria carry the children inside. The warmth hit them all at once, and Maria let out a shaky breath, like she'd been holding it for miles. The house smelled of coffee and wood smoke. Caleb set the children on the couch, piling blankets over them. Ellie stirred, mumbling something about pancakes. Maria brushed hair from her daughter's face, tears slipping down her cheeks now that she felt safe enough to let them fall. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Caleb cleared his throat. "You don't have to. Supper's on in a bit. You hungry?" She nodded, embarrassed. He moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, stirring a pot of stew he'd left simmering before heading to town. As they ate, Maria told him her story in pieces, how her husband had died in a factory accident 2 years earlier, how medical bills had swallowed everything, how she'd worked 2 jobs until one closed and the other cut hours. How the landlord had stopped being patient. How she'd promised her kids things would get better, even when she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Caleb listened, saying little, the way he always did. But inside, something was cracking open. He remembered Anna in the hospital, the machines, the bills he'd been able to pay because the ranch had been good to him. He remembered thinking he'd been spared. That night, looking at Maria and her children, he wondered if being spared meant being responsible. They slept that night in the guest room, a space that had gone untouched for years. Snow piled high outside, trapping them all in by morning. Maria tried to insist on leaving once the storm passed, but Caleb shook his head. "You'll stay till the roads are clear," he said. "And till the kids are strong again." Days turned into a week. Lucas helped feed the chickens. Ellie followed Caleb everywhere, asking endless questions about cows and tractors. Maria cooked, cleaned, and tried to make herself small, as if afraid kindness came with an expiration date. One evening, Caleb found her standing in the doorway of the guest room, staring at a framed photo of him and Anna on their wedding day. "She looks kind," Maria said softly. "She was," Caleb replied. "She'd have liked you." The realization came to him slowly, like dawn spreading across the fields. His house wasn't too big. It was too empty. The ranch didn't need more hands, but his heart did. When Maria finally told him she planned to head to the city once the snow melted, Caleb felt a fear he hadn't known since Anna died. "There's work here," he said, surprising himself. "Real work. And a school in town. If you wanted." Maria looked at him, hope and caution battling in her eyes. "You'd do that for us." Caleb thought of that night behind the feed store. Of 2 children crying in the cold. Of a coat wrapped around them because it was the only thing he had in that moment. "Seems to me," he said, voice steady, "we already started something. Wouldn't feel right stopping now." Spring came slow that year, but when it did, the ranch felt alive in a way it hadn't for a decade. Laughter carried across the fields. Footprints crowded the porch. And on cold evenings, when the wind still howled like winter hadn't quite let go, Caleb would watch Maria tuck the children in, wrapped in blankets, safe. Sometimes kindness doesn't arrive as a grand gesture. Sometimes it's a coat in the cold and a simple promise whispered into the dark, "Not tonight." And sometimes, that's enough to change everything.